today I thought I would like to talk about three different races that are very advanced in Stargate SG-1 that we already encounter in some form in the first season and also a little bit more in the second season, but they do have a trajectory that lasts throughout more of Stargate. But I actually thought what would be very interesting to do is do like a first impressions episode of these three races in what the episodes you've already seen so far are. And so these peoples would be the Nox, the Tollan, and Asgard. And they all have something in common in that they all have more advanced technology or development than Stargate. And they each have kind of a different approach to how they, for example, either share, don't share, or interact with what they consider to be beings that are, more primitive or young, as for example, the Nox call them. And I always thought it was very interesting because, at least something that I found is when I was watching Stargate, is that when they encounter and interact with these peoples, it was very interesting to see how the way that those peoples kind of reacted to and responded to the Earth culture and how they treated them kind of also caused one to reflect upon, the way that you would think about things. And I also know that when I first, for example, saw some of these interactions, that like at first I thought, oh, well, why wouldn't you, for example, help, or why would you do it this way or do it that way? And I thought that they're very good examples of showing the intricacies and complexities of some of these issues and like different things that kind of underscore them. And so I thought what I would do is maybe ask you, like, one, to tell, to remind where you are, because you're all, I think, a little bit behind in your watch through. I started a long time before you. And so to remind where you are, and then to maybe talk about, your impressions of these people's, specifically where you're at in the series.
Okay, yeah. So I'm currently on season 3, but I'm just kind of in the beginning parts of that. I believe I had just finished watching the episode called Dead Man Switch. So that's where I am currently. Um, so yeah, so with the Nox, that was from, I mean, I guess all these were from season 1, right? And so sorry, what was your question?
Well, mostly was wondering like your first impressions of these people, and we can talk about them one by one, or if we find that they're kind of interrelated and we want to discuss them kind of together, however it works better. But I thought like,
Okay.
just to kind of get your initial impressions, and it could be anything from, how you feel about them, what you think is cool, how they relate to the Earth people, and what your thoughts are on that. So.
Yeah. No, I think with the Knox, like, I think they are like one of my favorites in all honesty. Like, there's just like, I guess my first impression of them was just how kind of funny they looked with their like crazy hair and stuff. And I'm just like, oh, like I was like really curious about them, because like when you first watch that episode, it's like you don't really know like who they are, like, and everything. Um, but yeah, there's just something about them in particular that I just really, really like because they seem so peaceful and wise. And I think like if I had to choose like uh I guess what are they considered another race of whatever, but like I would want to be part of the Nox. Like I totally feel like I would fit in there. Like they're very earthy. I got wild hair. And like they're all about kind of like finding peaceful solutions and everything. And like I just really like them. Like I think I guess my initial I know what you're saying, like when SG-1 kind of initially meets different what's the word I would use? Would they be different species, different races, different like what terms should I be using here?
So I think in the context of Stargate, because I agree with you, I don't know what like technically it is, but I would use races because there's the episode The Fifth Race, where they talk about
Ah,
the four great races, which is actually, we're discussing three because they're the only three that appear in the show. So for anyone that's watching that's never seen the show, there's actually a fourth race called the Furlings that we never encounter, and it becomes kind of like a running joke in the show. And when they're referring to the fifth race, it's because one of these peoples, which I mean, I'm sure we'll get into, tells Jack O'Neill that the humans might eventually become the fifth race. So.
yeah. 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 So I guess yeah, when they are meeting other races, it does really make you think, because it's kind of like initially like my human mind is thinking like, gosh, these other places should be helping them, or the SG1 should be helping that race, like if they're needing help. And then sometimes you find like complicated things that don't make it so easy to do one or the other. And they both have very different ways of viewing things and different things that are important to them. So it's kind of like, it's like, for example, it's like, I don't know, like if you think of like Jack O'Neill, like always wanting to just kind of like fight, like he
Yeah.
just wants to fight and like get the bad guys kind of thing. But then you really question who are the bad guys sometimes, like depending on what episode you're watching and things like that. And so I think, it's just really interesting. It does make you think, like how would you feel in that situation? Like with the Knox, it's kind of like they it's like at first it's like I was just kind of like, well, they don't seem to want to do anything to help themselves, like, as or that's how I initially felt, like, when they're like trying to almost stay out of view in a way, in a sense, from what was it, from the Goa'uld, I believe, that are like trying to
Hmm.
find. I'm trying to remember, I think, what was that episode? I think the Goa'uld um thought that that big flying creature, what was it called? I have a
I can't.
note. The Fenry.
The
Fenry, is that?
Fenry, they thought it was disappearing, like it was able to make itself disappear. And I think they
Yeah.
wanted to study the technology. And so,
Yeah.
and I think, I mean, this is something, so just quickly, I want to clarify, we're actually only talking about two of the four great races because the Tollan are not part of it. So there is one more that we will discuss later because they don't appear yet. So
Oh,
just to correct that in case for anybody watching, because I somewhat misspoke. But the Fenry, the Goa'uld thought it had the capability of making itself invisible, and so that's why they were kind of going there. But I thought this was very interesting because another thing it kind of brought into like this episode that it kind of brought to I guess the consciousness of is this idea of like don't judge a book by its cover because they assumed it was the creature that could do this, and by the end of the episode you actually find that. And it's interesting because the Nox, I mean, they're introduced as like these sort of like forest people that are very simple and they don't use technology, and they're just these peaceful people living in the forest, but yet they have this great medicine. And like you experience through the SG team, like how do these people that seem so like quote unquote primitive have such great medicine and the ability to basically revive people from the dead. And I think what's very interesting is that at the end, the Nox reveal that basically they're hiding an entire city, and that they're the ones hiding the Fenry. They can basically make stuff disappear to avoid conflict. And I think
yeah.
it's really interesting because throughout that entire episode, you have the situation in which like of course, the SG team thinks they know what's best for the Nox. Like, oh, you have to protect yourself from the Goa'uld. Like, you have no idea what's coming your way. And actually, of course they did. Like, they were just kind of making that assumption based on their appearance and their behavior that they don't know, but they did. And I thought that was kind of
Yeah.
another interesting thing that um, the show brought out, especially, I mean, because that's something that is so, it happens always in like our society today, and especially with certain people and like even certain demographics where people will assume they don't know things even though they do. And so I thought that was also a really interesting part of it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Exactly. And like I think that's why I love, like, Stargate so much because, like, it always kind of brings up those things that actually really you can relate to in, like, real life with how people treat each other and interact and assume and stuff like that, and so, yeah, like, that's a very good point. That's exactly like, um well, I would assume maybe. I wonder, like, if that was kind of the intention of the episode is to I wonder, like, with the writers, like, when they write these have written these episodes, yes, it's obviously has to do with the storyline, but I wonder if they kind of try and put in those, bigger, like, visions of thought, like, that it provokes from people that are watching it. I wonder if that's, like, intentional, but,
Yeah. No, I absolutely think so. I mean, I
yeah,
think that's kind of, and I mean, of course, in the Stargate is a very, very self-aware show, which I think we'll probably have to do an entire episode on this. But they do bring that up, like in another show where they're sort of like in another episode where they're sort of making a commentary about Stargate. Again, we'll talk about this later. There is a character that mentions, about sci-fi and sort of like this quote unquote deep moment about how science fiction is supposed to make us like reflect on our own society and our own life. And I think that's exactly what happens. And I think it was the intention. And um, so, I mean, in that sense, yeah, it basically showed that throughout the entire episode, the Knox were trying to tell, the team they're fine, like they have it figured out, like obviously, like they're medicine, but they just assumed, and the
yeah,
end result was that because they didn't really believe them, they had to show them, and I think like that's where I think when they leave, like you know, they say something like, well, they tried to tell us and we just didn't listen. And then I think it's O'Neill or something says, well, that's something worth taking home. Because, the
yeah,
whole idea of the episode is that they take home this technology. And so,
yeah,
which I think is, it's very interesting. And so I guess in that sense, the Knox were like their relation with them. It wasn't necessarily that they had any, um, like refusal to share necessarily with them, but they had their ways, and their ways were their ways, and they didn't want to adopt the ways of someone else because what they were doing was working for them.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's so like common, I think, in real life for any one government or one area or one whatever, to think their way is the best way and why won't you
Yeah,
people listen, and we're just trying to help and it's like sometimes it does more harm than good because people aren't willing to kind of try and listen and understand each other. I think just in general, right? Like people are
yeah,
just like that. Like if you go to
yes,
therapy, what do they always say? Listen to the other person. Don't just like, you know. And so it's like yeah, I think Stargate does really well with kind of showing that aspect, I think, of humanity really. But what was your and I mean, I think you've probably kind of already said, but like, did you have anything to add in terms of like what your initial thoughts were of the Knox? Or like, do you like them in the same way that I do? Or is there anything that you find, because like for me, like something about them I just really like that I'm just like, if I had to choose a place to like be a part of, like from Stargate so far, like that would be one of them because they seem so weird but cool at the same time.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree because when I think about it, like if I were to say, like let's say for some reason I had to be in combat or like I had to be part of a war, I would definitely choose the people that could just make things disappear and avoid the war. Like
Yeah.
that would be my, and stop the conflict by removing the possibility to have it. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of like I would definitely roll that way. So, I mean, actually, yeah. I mean, I don't know if you remember, like some years ago, I even had a Knox, like back in the day when Facebook profile pictures weren't like a professional thing. I had like a Knox as a Facebook profile
Did you
picture.
really?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I don't remember that.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, no, they're one of my favorites, and so yeah.
Oh, that's cool. That's funny. I don't remember that at all. That's cool.
Yeah, and But yeah, so maybe as and to move into the next one because and this is, I know I'm not necessarily going in chronological order because I think actually the Asgard appeared before the Tollan, but um in in terms of segueing into how the behavior with SG-1, this comment of something worth taking home, when they first encountered the Tollan, and I think where you're at, you must have seen them in one and possibly two episodes, but I think only one. Um, when you first meet them, it is a very, it's also a very similar situation because they encounter them basically on a planet. It's like some volcano erupted or something, and they're all lying there, and SG-1 comes in and they think they need to be rescued and they rescue them. And of course, the first thing that they say when they get back is, "You made a big mistake, you shouldn't have rescued us." And so now
Yeah.
I want to hear your thoughts on your initial feelings about the Tolan.
Yeah, the Tolan. They're so I was looking back at the episode to try and remind myself, and I just very quickly pressed like the very beginning of the episode before we got on this podcast to remind myself like who exactly they were. And one of the first things that happen is exactly what you were saying, but also if you remember, Samantha Carter goes to like touch one of the bodies to see if they're alive, and then like he grabs her arm and he's just like, don't help, like he said something along the lines of like, don't like help us or something like that.
Hmm.
So I remember thinking like, so immediately when I saw that, I'm just like, why? Why don't they want them to help them? Like, are they bad? Like, what's happening? Um, and um I'm trying to remember, was this, I could be getting them confused, so correct me if I'm wrong, but was this the same race that was weird about women? Like, or was that a different one where they were weird about like not taking not taking like uh advice or anything from women, like they were thought of as like a lower.
No, I think this one they just thought of the people of Earth as primitive.
Okay.
And
Okay,
so
because
it wasn't necessarily women or anybody specifically, but it was like, yeah, I think a good like the Nox they called humans young, but the Tolan they were the ones that called them primitive,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Oh, that's right. And they had that I think like they were trying to help them, right? Help them get better. And then I believe like they were just mad that SG-1 took them in to help them. And I believe they had that kind of technology where they could just walk through
Yes,
the
yep.
walls. And at first they didn't know like how they managed to get basically outside of that area where as like the Stargate and everything is. Um, yeah, I don't know. Like it's kind of like the the Tolan kind of irritated me initially. Like especially with the one guy that was like, I don't know if he was like the leader of them all, but like he just had such a annoying look on his face. And just seemed very like judgy that like I didn't really initially like them at first. And then as the episode goes on, I think it kind of, you know, I guess like it kind of helped me understand them up to a point where they kind of grew on me because like I was trying to think like if you're that advanced, like, and then you suddenly have these people that take you through a Stargate thinking they're helping you and like but using all of their, I guess primitive like stuff to try and help you. I can see how there would be like a frustration there and like an annoyance because maybe like you feel like they can't help you like but like if I'm remembering correctly it was that they had been who had they been attacked by, they had been attacked by, was it the Goa'uld or I remember it was they'd all been attacked and they had to basically go to SG-1 had to help them find a safe place for them to live, right? That was just as advanced as they were.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in the end, like it was I thought it was like on a volcano, but it could have also been that they were attacked. I can't remember because now it was a long time ago, so maybe we'll have to check that. And
Oh, maybe
maybe,
it was a volcano.
but anyways, I mean, the
Yeah.
point is like they were, like in a situation where SG-1 perceived that they were near death and needed to be rescued. And I mean, I find this also a very interesting and complicated situation that brings a lot of things to the foreground because you have here on the one hand this sort of, I guess, American exceptionalism of thinking you have to save everybody and this kind of like savior syndrome. And then again, the assumption that you're the most advanced
Yeah.
people, or that, and on the other hand, like you have, I mean, I think what they said is like, because of course, like SG-1 wanted to kind of, or the Stargate Command, they wanted to share technology with them because it would help fight the Goa'uld. But the Tollan, their whole reason behind refusing was that whenever they'd done that in the past, like the planet wiped itself out. And I mean, in this case, like, yeah, of course, I would agree that no matter how much the like Stargate Command and everybody thought that if they got advanced weapons, like it wouldn't cause some kind of geopolitical problem. I think especially at that time it probably would. And you can't predict that. And I think it's kind of like saying, oh yeah, well if I had $5 million, of course I would never be, feeling, or like if I was like the president, of course I wouldn't do this, or of course I wouldn't do that, like because you are the way you are at this moment. But it's hard to say like how would you respond if you had power or a lot of money or something. It's kind of
Yeah.
hard to know unless you were actually in that situation. And so I kind of like I understand their feelings about it, but I also thought like especially the leader was extremely condescending. Like he was more condescending than, like, I think there's a line where, Colonel O'Neill says something at this time, like, when they say call them primitive, and he's like, well, yeah, well, this other race they call us young. That is a little bit nicer, like implying that it's kind of a nicer
Yeah.
way of saying it. And um, so, and I think like in this sense, like they're extremely like hesitant to share anything. Like there was one character called Nareem that um like pretty much every, like many other people that come in contact with Carter has a crush on Carter. And he is of course revealing things like mostly about science because she's a scientist, and the leader gets really angry with him. But I mean, I think in his case it was very innocent. I think he saw that, Carter had like this true genuine curiosity, and he just wanted to
Yeah.
talk to her about these things. um and so, but in that sense, like I think that's one of those like situations where it's this huge gray area, because like they're not like perfect, but they have a lot of points in what they're saying. And um like for me, one of the most interesting parts of this episode is when they're about to leave, because the way that they're able to get to where they need to go is that the SG-1 basically contacts the Nox, or has them contact the Nox using their methods, and the Nox come and pick them
Mhm.
up basically. And at the end, when Laya comes, one of the Nox, and to take away the Tollan, she says something like, because they actually, I think they had to go against what they were told by Stargate Command to let them escape. Everybody's standing there with guns and ready to stop them, and she says, "Your people have learned nothing," and she says, "But you have," basically indicating that SG-1 on their travels have started to learn things about as they are coming in contact with these people. And I thought
Yeah.
that was kind of a really interesting kind of tie-in, and also kind of connecting those two peoples, especially because I think both races have kind of a similar approach to how they deal with, the sharing of info, but yet a very different one at the same time. So
Yeah. That kind of exactly. The kind of this is going to sound random, but the Knocks kind of remind me of like if you were to imagine them like because they're so like wise but yet caring. It's like they almost remind me of if we think of them as like it, if people believe in like angels and things like that, like like these angelic beings that like just kind of are so wise and know all these things, but are kind about how they communicate it. And even if it's kind of like said, like, you've learned nothing kind of thing, it's not said in a rude way. It's kind of like still said in a very peaceful and loving way to try and like make their point or whatever, that they kind of remind me of like the equivalent of like what I would imagine like uh an angel to be like if like they're watching the humans and like trying to guide you along the way of like living a better, more understanding life and learning things. And so it's kind of interesting that the Tolan actually went with them because um, since I haven't seen episodes, I think, of the Tolan after that point, like I wonder if like the Tolan will have learned um anything from that, to kind of be a bit less harsh with how things are communicated, like how you were talking about like the primitive comment and things like that. So
Yeah. I mean, they didn't, I don't think they moved in with the Knox. Like they
did
didn't,
they
but they,
not? Oh, I thought
no,
they
but
did.
they helped them relocate because they had
Oh,
means of, they figured they could help them relocate. So I think they helped them relocate to somewhere. I mean, maybe I'm mistaken. So maybe we have to check that. But I was always under the impression that the Knox helped them relocate. I mean, or maybe they went to,
you're
I mean, it's,
probably right. Yeah. I mean, you've seen it a lot more than I have. So like I'm just like re-seeing it after seeing it, that one time through initially, but like how I took it, it was probably wrong. Like I thought that they were saying that they needed to go to a different planet because the other one was uninhabitable or whatever, and that they needed to find another race of people that um were as advanced as them for them to be on their planet, but I must have misunderstood that. You're probably right.
yeah, I just quickly looking it up. It says something like, yeah, actually, it says the series never, I don't think the series ever explained in detail how the surviving Tolans were able to get to their new home after they were helped with the Nox. So I think it was like implied the Nox helped them because, I mean, you if you haven't seen the newer episodes,
Mhm.
um, they where it does show their new
Oh, okay.
planet, but again, they they you will see in the later episodes they clearly still have contact with the Nox. So
Okay.
yeah, so we can kind of explore that when the
Yeah.
time comes. But yeah, so that's also and that's also something that it would be interesting to discuss because I do think that later on you learn a little bit more of the intricacies,
Mm.
and just like everything, things are always more complicated than they seem to be.
Yeah,
uh,
of specifically of the Tolan?
yes, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
exactly, yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
exactly.
Because I guess if you think about it, that episode like doesn't really dive too deep into who they are, really. Like they kind of do, but not kind of more at a surface level. So, um, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it'll
I
be
mean,
interesting.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's something about season one, especially you have this situation where they're basically just encountering all of these things that they've never encountered before and the lessons that they basically have to learn. And I
Yeah.
think that, I mean, I think actually this is something that I kind of appreciate a lot about the show that even in the first season, like they're not always the right ones. Like they're not always right.
Yeah.
And I kind of appreciate that because it could be really easily made out that they tell the Nox not to be like neutral because they have to fight the Goa'uld, and then then they have to rescue the Nox as a result because even though they have they could easily have made it this way and
Yeah.
they didn't, and so I think that kind of makes it much more interesting because it's like it forces this characters to learn as they're exploring, which I think is
Yeah.
also much more realistic.
Yeah,
um
and then they kind of and I know we're not necessarily talking about this and I don't remember what the name of the episode was, but it's just because I recently saw this episode maybe a day or so ago, where it kind of they have that weird mirror looking thing where then they kind of encounter like the alternate realities.
Hmm.
You know how like there's other Carters and other Jack O'Neills or Teal'cs and things like that that live in an alternate reality. And so because of like the reason I thought of that is because of what you were saying about how how they're not always right. Like it's interesting when they bring that aspect into the show because then you kind of see like how things could have went if they chose different things. Like
Yes.
I mean they kind of do make it like the one reality that we're watching has made the best choices, but like it's just interesting. Like and I do appreciate that with the show like you said where SG1's not always right. Sometimes they make crappy decisions that then you see like the fallout of that or you know or certain characters. I think we actually kind of talked about that with the character like episode that we had, right? Where we're kind of briefly talking about like the SG1 members, like how like, you know, they aren't so black and white where it's like they always make the right decision, you know.
Yep.
You know, sometimes their emotions sway like what to do or how they react to something. Um and I think like that's really important that the show has that because if it didn't, it would just probably be boring to like have it always just be, oh, they've met another race of, you know, another race on another planet and then you know SG1 comes in to save the day and you know then all is well, you know. Like
Yeah, exactly.
that
Well, I
would
mean,
like yeah.
it makes it, I mean, think about when you think about people that are very relatable, usually they have quirks or like quote unquote flaws or like other things that, like usually people that everything about their life is perfect and they're perfect 100% of the time aren't usually as relatable.
Yeah.
And so like in real life, they're not as relatable. Or people that put that facade on, it's like if you have some like things going on or obviously nobody is 100% one way or another way, and so I think it
Yeah.
kind of makes things more relatable, so it helps. um but it's interesting that you brought up the thing about how the in one reality certain things were obviously in a better place, and I think one thing that is like always stressed whenever they have undercovering things like this is that they have they stress the importance of the relationships that they've made.
Yeah.
That they made a relationship with Teal'c. They made a relationship with the Asgard. And I mean that's also kind of a nice segue into talking about the final one that we'll bring up, because actually that's something that I think was brought up a few times is in the show, is how important that relationship they made with them is. And so I think that is always like this underlying message of the show, that they're that even though there was kind of like this background um sort of mission that they had of getting better technology and whatnot and bringing back better things, that actually what was much more valuable was the alliances they made and the people
Yeah.
that they met. Um and so the Asgard and I mean you'll have to tell me how much you've seen of the Asgard so far, but I'm pretty sure you've already seen the fifth race, right? You've
Yes.
seen the episode. Okay, so this is the most important thing. If you've seen that already, then you're quite aware of what the Asgard are. Uh, but of course, they're introduced in the Thor's Hammer episode, where the the team goes onto a planet and immediately, I think it's like Teal'c is zapped away. Um, and if I'm remembering correctly, like O'Neill is zapped away with him because he kind of catches him, like to try and, because something goes wrong, like,
Oh
you know,
yeah. Yeah.
and they're kind of set into this other place, like they're on another place on the planet. But the idea is, because obviously, if you haven't seen it, go ahead and watch it. But obviously, the idea behind it is that they somehow, there's people that they encounter which don't seem like they should have this technology. Again, it's another situation where they're encountering a race that is seemingly, like not as technologically advanced as them, have this device that just zaps away gold.
You're
And
talking about Thor's hammer, right?
yes.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's kind of where you first get introduced to this. And so, I mean, essentially, basically, the Asgard they're introduced over the next over other episodes as like this race that does have planets that they sort of quote unquote protect, or they protect from the Goa'uld by having certain things in place that help them from being attacked. And it's very interesting because something that is kind of like a theme that runs through Stargate is that there's this connection with religion and mythology. And so, like the Goa'uld are kind of derived from ancient religions, and in this case, the Asgard are sort of like not necessarily impersonating or kind of playing, but they're somehow like embodying or playing the role of like Norse gods and goddesses.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because that's kind of like another thing where it's this question of okay, the Goa will do this and it's bad, but the Asgard do this, but it's sort of to protect people. But then there's still the question of how ethical is this? But they have their reasons also for doing it, and as a result, there are many people that basically get to live in complete peace from the Goa'uld.
Mhm.
So yeah, so my then question to you would be share your first impressions on the Asgard.
Yeah, so the Asgard, so initially in, if I'm remembering correctly, in Thor's hammer, when Teal'c and Jack O'Neill get beamed into almost like uh it's like a cave like thing, right? And it's almost like they have to do certain like tasks and things to try and get out of it. Like I believe there's also the big creature, right? That like
Mm-hmm. The
tries to kill
Unas.
them. And then when they finally reach like near the end of it where I believe they're trying to decode something or there was some sort of thing that they had to try and like figure out and then and before all of this it's like showing the holograph right of like what people think of Thor to be, you know?
Yes.
Um, and so it's like they know right or they initially figure right away that it's like a holograph and it's like a repeated recording is what they're thinking it is. And then when they finally get to the end part of that and then it reappears that Thor holograph, like then beams in the little alien dude that says he's Thor. And like and I think if I'm remembering correctly, up shows as his true form because he thought that they had reached a certain level of intelligence, right?
Mm-hmm.
In order to be able to understand his true form and who they are. And so, um, because of this being my second time watching it, right? Like I had
Mm-hmm.
completely forgotten about it altogether. And I'd forgot about there being the cool little alien dude Thor and like, you know, the Asgard and all of that. So I think like um yeah, I mean, my initial like thought of the Asgard from that episode was just like, okay, I can see like why they, you know, maybe pretend one thing in order to make sense to like the mind of those that live on that planet or even to like SG1 their human minds, you know, to kind of grasp a concept that makes sense to them. So I could kind of understand maybe kind of cloaking themselves in a way that like they're not really fully giving up who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Because with the type of power that the Asgard has, like, you know, that could be kind of I don't know. Like I kind of feel like if everyone knew of them as being like little alien dudes and stuff, like maybe like they wouldn't have been uh received so warmly with that whole idea of like Thor and all this stuff. Like, I don't know. I just feel like it could have been different, maybe, like if they initially did show who they were right away. So I don't know. But I like the Asgard, but as it continues on, like it's kind of like while it's a very like cool and like wise like race, it just seems like sometimes there are things like that occur that like you kind of quit like I don't know like you can maybe tell me like because this is kind of skipping ahead to um I believe it's the fifth race episode. I
Yep.
don't really remember because were they also, I don't remember what the episode was that I think is titled Thor's Chariot. I
hmm
don't know were they in, I'm assuming they were in that. Um, but in the fifth race, I remember there being like that meeting, right? There was like a meeting between, hopefully I'm remembering the right episode. Like it's a meeting between the Asgard and SG1, and then there was different I don't know what they're called, like different like I think um oh no, I don't remember the names. Like they had the meeting with the other people. Do you know what I'm talking about?
So in the fifth race, what
Or
happened
was
is
that not, was that a different episode altogether? Maybe I'm talking about something completely different.
I'm not sure. So the fifth race is the one where O'Neill gets the entire repository of the ancients downloaded into his brain, and
Okay.
he starts speaking kind of nonsense,
Oh,
and
okay. Yes, I was
and
talking
then
about. Okay.
he gates he pushes too many things in the Stargate, and if I remember right, he builds a ZPM, and then he makes the gate go to a different galaxy, um, so that
Okay.
so that to the Asgard, he basically gates himself to the Asgard so they can remove it from his brain.
That's
and
right.
and that's when,
Okay.
but I mean, I think at this point, like they already know who the Asgard are at this point, because I think they find out in Thor's chariot, right? And so I think they already know who the Asgard are. And at this point, this is where you find the alliance of the four races. And so like I said, two we've talked about here, which is the Asgard and the Nox. And then there's the ancients and the Furlings.
Okay.
And the
I'll need to.
ancients, yeah, we'll talk about them later because you meet them a little bit later. But
Yeah, I think it's because of like I've been watching a lot of the episodes quite quickly, and so like I think some of the episodes are mushing into
hmm
one
hmm
where like I can't remember what is from what because I had recently watched something that was a different episode from these where the Asgard do come down to like there's like a whole meeting thing and slight chaos. So that's what I was thinking. But yes, now okay, thank you. Now the fifth race, oh my god, that actually was one of my favorite episodes.
yes, it is definitely a fan favorite. I definitely love it.
Because that's where like Jack O'Neill has like the random like language that he starts like speaking, right? And like he
uh-huh.
talks about his Fran.
Yeah. It sounds so terrible when you say it out of context. He's talking about his Fran.
Yeah, like I think like I'll need to find where I wrote him down, but when I started like watching this episode, I'm like, oh my gosh, I love this so much just with the weird random shit that he says. Like
Yes, exactly. I mean, this is like what Stargate is classic for, right? Just popped right into my Fran.
yeah, like that's like yeah, like this is what definitely what sorry, I totally went on a tangent. You
No,
would
that's
like asked me what you were asking me my initial thoughts on them, right? On the Asgard. I keep saying them, but I've really only in these episodes seen the one little man, but I know it's like a whole
Thor, yeah.
pile of pile of alien dudes or whatever gender they may be.
Well, that I think more information about that is revealed later on.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I like the Asgard. Like I think they have come at a convenient time within the show, like when they first, that whole thing happens because they've definitely helped them out of some sticky situations by just beaming them out of there. So
Exactly. They're very the Asgard. They're known for their good timing.
yeah,
Sometimes
yeah.
they're terrible timing, but I love that Stargate is super self-aware of this. You know, like that it's so self-aware that like, and I love that they play with it a few times, because I know there's some times when like they're beamed out like in totally or beamed in like the wrong moment. And I love that the writers play with this. It's perfect.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like this all just like the few like conversations we've had like with like starting this podcast and talking about Stargate, it's made me realize like how truly genius the writers are.
Yes,
Like,
yes,
that must
100%.
not be easy. That must not be easy by any means to kind of keep the content so like engaging and have so much like to it. That's not just like um one-sided or just kind of like falls flat. Like they've managed like throughout all the episodes of SG1, it just kind of progressively gets better and better and better. So it's kind of like kudos to the to the writers, man.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and they sustained this for 10 years.
Yeah.
And then they have, and I mean, okay, I will right now, in my watch through, I'm currently in season 8 of SG1 and season 1 of Atlantis. I've seen all of Atlantis, but I only have seen it once, and it was in 2011. And so I actually don't remember everything. And I have not seen Universe yet. So in this watch through, actually, both of us are watching everything, and including the films. Other than, I guess we didn't watch the introduction. Did you watch the movie Stargate yet, or no?
Oh, I think I saw it a long time ago and I don't remember. I may have actually watched it before I ever watched this series because if I remember correctly, you and your partner at the time had introduced me to Stargate, and I think had suggested that we watch the movie first, I
Hmm.
think, and then I watched the series. I think, but I vaguely remember the movie, so I must have seen it, but I have not rewatched it. Um, I think for me, it's a little hard to want to, um, just because like I'm so attached to like the actors from the series, um, that they're either not in the movie, right?
Yeah.
Or it's like different actors for Colonel O'Neill and Daniel Jackson, which I know like they're great too, but like it's just kind of like when you get used to the people of the show and like kind of the vibe of the show, I believe a lot of people have said is very different from that first movie.
I
Um
think the movie is very serious, and like, I mean, I think with Daniel Jackson, like when they first cast the person, they did kind of imagine someone that was a lot like James Spader. So I think that character is much closer. And
yeah.
I think I actually saw the movie after seeing like one or two episodes, like just a couple random episodes of Stargate, and then I had watched the movie, and I remember thinking, okay, he really is like this is very similar, like at least the trajectory from that character into the first season.
Yeah.
And then of course Daniel Jackson does, develop. But Colonel O'Neill is very different,
Yeah.
because I think when they put on Richard Dean Anderson, I think he has to make a character with a sense of humor, and I mean, which is perfect because I think that's one of the things why like this show actually works. And I mean, I know with a movie it's very different. It's more like it's 2 hours. That's very serious. But for something like a show, you need something like that to sustain this, because it is lengthy. It goes over time, and you can't have serious forever. And it's just, I think it lightens. Like I absolutely. I mean, we'll have to probably do like we'll have many episodes on this, like where we maybe go into more detail about these things, like when we talk about their interaction with like the Goa'uld and the other, um, basically antagonists or enemies. But I always love how like, sometimes like O'Neill will just say like things to the Goa'uld that it's like it's totally like sarcastic, and like I'm like, oh my God, I would be so afraid to say that to them,
I
but it's
know,
like
I know.
100%.
Or it's like if they get stuck in like a situation where like they think they're all gonna die and he's just like being sarcastic and it's like
Yeah.
it's like, would you really do that, sir? I'm not sure.
But like it helps having someone like that on your team. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, I remember my favorite, like one of my favorite things is like when they, um, and I mean, again, this is more things we can talk about later. But one of my favorite things is like when they're trapped somewhere, and the way that they thought they would be able to get out of this place was removed from them. And I think it's one of the characters is like, no, we'll never get out. And O'Neill's like, of course we can. And he's like, well, what, the way we thought we could get out is removed. And he's like, well, yeah, but this other person escaped. So obviously, if it's been done before, we can do it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, you need that the can do attitude. And I think they kind of kept that through the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And when he doesn't have that, like I think there was um the episode where him and Carter get like by accident put into that very icy
Mm-hmm.
um area, and like he's like injured, and like they like basically think they're gonna freeze to death there. I think it ended up actually being another part of Earth, right? That they got
Mm-hmm.
transported to by accident. In that he's less positive, but like
Yes.
at first he is, but then he reaches a point where he just thinks he's going
Yes.
to die and wants Carter to get out of there and try and save herself. And like what I think is, you know, very true to I think a lot of dynamics of just people like humans, like is that if one starts to doubt, then there's that other one to come in and try and help them stay strong. And
Yep.
they kind of take that role. And so she kind of took that role later on in that episode.
Mm-hmm.
What I did want to quickly mention too, as you were talking about like how important like the characters and stuff are, is I had um just like yesterday watched this YouTube channel where the guy was interviewing an executive from Stargate, and he was asking him about like the casting process. And I know that has nothing to do with what we're talking about today, but I just thought it was like interesting how he was kind of discussing the importance of finding the right actors for the characters and how important that was, and then how important their take on those characters were. And so it kind of fits into what you're saying about finding someone to play Jack O'Neill, when they found Richard Dean Anderson, and how he added humor to that. And like, I guess even for example with Teal'c, they said they had a really, really hard time casting Teal'c. They're either and it was just between him and another guy that had been like in the audition for that, and they just didn't like the other guy. And as soon as they saw, Christopher Judge with Teal'c, they thought like he's perfect, he's Teal'c.
Right?
And with like Samantha Carter, I guess they had a really hard time. It took them basically how they described any of the actors is it took them a very long time in the casting process to find the right people,
Yeah.
because they explain like with like Samantha Carter, that character, while they wanted her to be this, you know, attractive character, she also had to have a lot of depth to her and be believable of being, um, in the job position that she was in, and from the what she from initially from the Air Force, is it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And incredibly smart, like an astrophysicist,
Astrophysicist. Yep.
physicist. Yeah, that's a tongue twister. um and so like I guess it was like really hard for them to find someone that like visually and how they acted out the character could fit that role. And when they finally had her audition, they just thought she was like perfect. And I guess like interestingly enough, they had initially um just like seen um footage of her because she used to do some sort of like comedy skit thing
Mm-hmm.
because she was really into comedy. And they saw footage of her comedy skit, and then they had her come in and
Oh,
audition.
nice.
So because they wanted her to have like a lightheartedness as well, like and I guess also her chemistry with Richard Dean Anderson was important because initially they wanted the like will they or won't they kind of vibe with the two of them. And then with Daniel Jackson, I guess Michael Shanks, like, Oh, that funny enough, the interviewer for that says that when he first saw Michael Shanks in the series, he thought that Michael Shanks was actually David
James,
Spade, or what's his name?
is it James Spader or maybe
James
it's David Spader? Dang
David
it,
Spade,
because you
James
said
Spader.
David.
Oh shoot, I was probably wrong. I don't know why I said David. I don't know why I said David. I don't think
Okay,
it's David.
but do you want to have your mind blown? Because there actually is an archaeologist called Michael Shanks.
What?
Yeah. Hang on. I remember reading it and I'm like, that is just a wild, like, what are the
Oh
odds?
no, I'm hashtagging Michael Shanks in all of our posts.
Yeah,
It's gonna go to an
yeah.
archaeologist.
No joke. Michael Shanks is a British archaeologist specializing in classical archaeology and archaeological theory. Is that insane?
Wow, how strange.
Like, it's wild, right?
What? How old are they?
So the archaeologist Michael Shanks is um 10 years older than I was gonna say than the normal Michael Shanks. No, it's like than our he is born in 1959. So
Okay.
he is 12 years older than the Michael Shanks that performs
Oh, how
the character of Jimmy
funny!
Jackson.
Because I was just like, oh wow, that's interesting. That's so funny.
Yeah, it's really weird. But yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think it's weird because I can't imagine people in their roles. And like, you know that Tilk is a U of O grad.
I
Christopher Judd is
know.
a U of O grad, and Michael Shanks is a UBC grad. So
Oh
it's
my
like
gosh. So
I
strange because both of us, for people that don't know, lived in Oregon and you went to the U of O and were a grad there, right? And
and I
then also in Canada, you went to another university.
yeah, the one that yeah, I went to UBC as well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So you're
Yeah.
like following the guidance of the Stargate people.
Yeah. But a fun fact, like I did actually that did play a factor into why I partially why I applied and why I ended up choosing that
Yeah.
school. And I mean, I think it was within like a couple days of being there that I met someone who actually had played a wraith on SG1 randomly.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
And I think like one time I was at like a one of my son's like classmates' birthday parties. Like I think one of the parents there had been in many like Stargate episodes, like playing something. So it's really
Oh, that's so cool. Oh my gosh. That would be like a dream. That would be a complete dream. Like, I don't want to have to act, but like, I just want to be made up to look like a creepy character and just kind of be in the background somewhere. Like, I'm down for going through hours and hours of makeup to look like a wraith just so I can kind of be in the background and just kind of freak people out. And that would be
so
amazing.
there you go. In the revival of Stargate, you can
Yes, which seems like it's gonna be a thing, right?
yes.
Like at least so or so we've heard because what was that? You had shared a link with me where a guy was talking to was it an MGM exec that he was
Yes.
talking to that was kind of giving him the lowdown.
Yes.
Is that the right
So
terminology? The lowdown
yes.
um of the future of, you know, continuing on with Stargate, and it seems to be a thing, but it hasn't been like publicly announced yet, right? I think
Yes, I think there's it's like theoretically it will happen, but I mean we hear I hope so. Because it
yes.
seems like they just if they just got like if Amazon acquired rights and it seems like there's things moving in that direction, maybe it's
I mean, I
possible.
think they should because I mean, what
I
would
hope so
be the
too.
reason not to? I mean, it is amazing like how long people have loved this show and then it continues to gain younger fans that, you know, are just I mean, you have your kids like the show and how old are they? They're
17, 14, and 10. So
yeah. So I mean, it, you know, it's kind of like the equivalent of like if you think of, you know, Star Wars, Star Trek, it's like they continue to gain fans of their content and like it would be insane to me if they didn't, you know, have another series like I think a series would work better than movies to be honest. Like I think
mhm.
um at least the types of fans that like the show maybe would agree. I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear if people what people think, like if they think there should be another Stargate show and in what way. Like,
Yep.
should it be a continuation of SG1? Should it be a new thing? Um, like what are their thoughts on that? And do you think it should be a series or a movie or both? Or um I guess for me, I think it should be a series, and I think it should include past people. Like I think it should include like um people from SG1 uh that but obviously not have them be main characters. Like I mean there's part of me that would love to have them be like in it all the time as well, but like it would make sense to have a new team, I think, and
Yeah.
maybe have them be at like different positions where they're still in the show, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, presumably they'd all be in leadership roles at this point. Maybe I
Yeah.
always kind of like secretly want Carter to be the running at SGC. Like, I think that'd be really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And
then
I've
that's
heard other
also,
people say that too. Yeah.
yep, yeah. So I think that's a popular one. But yeah,
Yeah.
so actually, maybe we can ask people what they would like. And going back to our like kind of the topic, we should also ask, what was your initial impression of the Nox, the Tollan, and the Asgard? And
Yeah.
I guess we'll make a follow-up to this to kind of expand on the initial impression and also to introduce I guess the the other the third race, because we'll never be able to introduce the fourth race. But we
Yeah.
will introduce the ancients at a different time.
Yeah. And I guess another question is if you had to choose which one you would like to be a part of, as in the Nox, the Tolan, or the Asgard, who would you choose? I know I would choose the Nox. I think you mentioned the Nox as well, and I'm curious what listeners would choose to be a part of if they had to choose between those three.